I would love to pick your brain on the H20 chips because AI chip maker Nvidia said they will suffer a $5.5 billion blow after the Trump administration put new restrictions on selling H20 chips to China. And do you see President Trump's about face when it comes to new restrictions on the H20 chips, which were originally made to adhere with U.S. export restrictions as a response to China blocking rare earth shipments?
Well, that's a whole complicated issue. I think the idea of China making a strenuous response should not surprise anyone. China is very dependent on exports, and the trade war, especially from their point of view, is quite complicated in that their economy is only two-thirds the size of ours. So that means a dollar of pain that we inflict on their exports has 1.5 times the impact of a power of a pain that they inflict on us. Second, they export to us so much more than we do to them that pretty soon they run out of products to put tariffs on long before we would. So the strategies for China are very complex. And I was pleased to see, and I think it was constructive, that the Chinese publicly indicated that they're open to negotiating the tariff situation. And they even appointed a special, very senior person to be their point person. And they asked for, President Trump to do the same thing. And the only quid pro quo they sought was to be treated with a little more respect and not have all the slamming that many of the cabinet officials have been doing of China. So I thought that was a good conciliatory move on their part and one that hopefully will lead to negotiations. The other part of negotiations, though, is this. During Trump's first administration, we made a fairly extensive phase one deal with China, but they never lived up to it. So one of the key things that we ought to focus on this time is enforcement. If we do make a deal with China and they don't live up to it, what are we going to do to enforce it? How will we, in effect, punish them if they don't live up to the deal this time? And that's a complicated thing to do. But I think, given our history with them, it's a very important component. If you don't have an ability to enforce an agreement, what is it really worth?
President Trump said that talks between the United States and China are underway. He expects more talks to come, and he does predict that we will find a deal with China. In President Trump's first term as Commerce Secretary, you traveled to Beijing for trade talks with China. If you could impart any advice to the Trump administration and Commerce Secretary Lutnick in particular when it comes to dealing with China, speaking with them, and negotiating with them, what would that advice be?
Well, the main thing would be to recognize that we will have to make some sort of concessions to them in order to get concessions from them. And I don't mean just in terms of tariff, because the Chinese also have put up a lot of non-tariff trade barriers, uh, limitations on products that are not science-based at all, but are really just designed to prevent us from selling those products to them. You have to factor in the non-tariff trade barriers as well. We have very few non-tariff trade barriers. So there isn't much to worry about for the Chinese from us, but we have a lot to worry about from the Chinese side.
You've seen President Trump do his deal making. You've been in the room where it happens, so to speak. When you see President Trump now focusing on semiconductors, do you think he's using that as a chip, no pun intended, to get China to the negotiating table?
Well, every trade discussion ends up being a negotiation, and that's not only appropriate, it's inevitable, because trade is one of the most complicated economic phenomena a country has to deal with, because there are so many different geographies, there are so many different products. Every situation is a little bit different. Everybody's coming at it from a little different angle. So it President Trump learned a lot about it during his first administration, because we had extensive negotiations, not just with China, but with lots of other folks as well. And he also, very importantly, has become acquainted with the Chinese leadership. Prior to the administration, he had never dealt with the Chinese governmental leadership, so he didn't really have a clear idea what it would be like to deal with them. Now he's dealt with them quite a bit, both in terms of trade and in terms of all sorts of other policies. So I think he's better positioned to understand how to get a deal done.